Laura Gotensteiner and Cynthia Santos Briones for The Nation. The walls of this church are the only thing standing between Amanda Morales and deportation. Episode 1 in a special series, Finding Sanctuary. Joining me, the idea of churches providing sanctuary to those in need is nothing new. But with an increase in ICE arrests and deportations under the Trump administration, sanctuary has taken on a new meaning. Currently, there are at least 36 immigrants throughout the U.S. taking refuge inside churches to avoid deportation. One of them is Amanda Morales. Since receiving a deportation order in August, Morales has been living with her 3 children in a Manhattan church. Joining me, Laura Gotensteiner and filmmaker and photographer Cynthia Santos Briones. The two are following the family story, and their series in The Nation is called Finding Sanctuary. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
So just sort of an outline broadly, how did you start on the project?
Well, I met Amanda Morales in Hollywood Church at the same day that she took sanctuary with her 3 kids, Dulce, Daniela, and David. And from that day, I started photographing and documented their lives. I asked her in the beginning, if she wanted to do it, and she said yes. And Laura and myself and Mala, we started by interview her and document their life inside sanctuary and taking photos and record voice and videos.
Okay, just back up just a second. So how do you all know each other?
Since 2012.
Yeah, we've known each other since 2012, and I've always been a really big fan of Cynthia's work. She's done a really amazing photo series called Abuelas about undocumented grandmothers, and then she started documenting people who are in sanctuary, looking at their daily lives, not just going in and then hopefully coming out with protection, but what does it mean to live in sanctuary in this moment?
So the idea of churches providing sanctuary has been around for a while. What are the origins of the sanctuary movement? Laura.
So, the sanctuary movement arose in the early 1980s, in the middle of the U.S.-backed wars in Central America. And I think what's really important to understand is that the sanctuary movement first began as people fleeing these wars, particularly from El Salvador, came to the United States and began organizing an anti-war movement here, demanding the U.S. stop backing the death squads and the right-wing governments in Central America. And part of that anti-war movement that they began organizing was about educating the American public about what was really happening in El Salvador, in Honduras, and Guatemala. And so they went all across the country to different churches, as well as labor groups and student groups, educating people about the war and the anti-war movement. And many U.S. churches were extremely moved and wanted to help and support. And they were also inspired, by the Underground Railroad, as well as by the legacy of European churches sheltering Jews during World War II. So they said, what we can do is we can provide shelter for people as they were fleeing these wars and arriving at the U.S. only to find themselves immediately subject to deportation.
Cynthia, one of the things I'm always so struck by, and particularly about this, is that churches survive. They survive cynicism.
Mm-hmm.
They survive politics. What is your sense of why churches are always going to be, or have always been, this place that of sanctuary?
Because it's their objectives, no? Is the way that why the churches were founded, no? Is help people, support these kind of people who need help, need support. And I live in a church, and it's the spirit of the churches is provide help to those who don't have.
Laura, when did the sanctuary movement get revived? Was the Trump administration the major catalyst, or was there some movement before?
So right now we're seeing more people in sanctuary than at any time since the 1980s. And we do have to say, in the 1980s, we saw 500,000 people sheltered in churches, hundreds of churches all across the United States, a really incredible movement. But it did get revived before the Trump administration. It got revived towards the end of the George Bush administration, the George W. Bush administration, when you started to see a ramping up of deportations. And then it continued and grew all throughout the Obama administration when you really saw a historic number of deportations. And now in the Trump administration, as we're seeing a really ruthless surge in the number of detentions across the United States, not just at the U.S.-Mexico border, but all throughout the interior of the United States. We're seeing, again, an unprecedented surge of the new sanctuary movement, as it's known.
Cynthia, let's talk about what this all looks like for Amanda. What has Amanda's life, what was it like before she took sanctuary?
Well, I don't want to speak a lot about Long Island because I don't want to go to her family and race at some point, but was like every, immigrant family, working with the 3 kids in the home, making tortillas, like a traditional Guatemalan family life. And she's missing her life back in Long Island, and she hopes to come back soon to the real life with her 3 kids.
And so she was what was she doing for work?
She was working in a factory.
And all 3 of her kids?
Born in Long Island City. Okay. They are American citizens.
Okay, and so they are all in the church now?
Yeah, they moved to Holyrood Church, and now they are in a school close by to the church.
Laura, what has the federal government said about churches? Are they protected? Are they protected?
Yeah, that's a question a lot of people are asking right now. So according to a 2011 memo, which was issued under the Obama administration, churches are sensitive locations, which means ICE Immigration Customs Enforcement agents are not supposed to carry out arrests, detentions at churches, as well as at other sensitive locations like schools, hospitals, unless they say sort of under what they would deem as extraordinary or circumstances. What does this mean? They can carry out deportations at churches, or they can carry out arrests at churches. We've seen them carrying out more arrests at places like schools, but I think the most important thing is, the sanctuary movement didn't arise because churches are protected spaces legally. It arose because churches are protected spaces morally, where there's a higher law above ICE's policies.
And is there anywhere else where that is the case?
Legally,
but I mean this notion of a space that's protected because it's morally correct.
I think,
or safe, right?
I mean, Cynthia, I think I'd say that churches, as you mentioned, are in their mission are moral spaces where one government's laws are transcended by what people consider to be humane and just laws, and that's why the sanctuary movement, I think, has so much moral right and weight.
Yeah, even though, like, for ICE, people who took sanctuary or are taking sanctuary are considered like fugitives and criminal, they can be arrested anytime, even though it's a moral issue, no?
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Right. Well, that's what I'm trying to get at and understand. So, in the space of the church, Amanda and her children are protected because it's morally the right thing to do. But if they leave the church, what happens to morals?
Well, I mean, I think that gets to a question about what do we want to see in this country. This is not something that has come out of the blue or started under the Trump administration, but we are seeing, I think, because of the extreme anti-immigrant and racist rhetoric of the Trump administration, we're seeing more and more people asking, okay, what is the United States, and what and how in this moment do we want to conduct ourselves in relation to people who come here because they want a life that's safe for their family, which is certainly the situation for Amanda.
Does it feel, Cynthia, like she will be safe? Does she feel safe?
Yeah, she feels safe there. It's difficult, no, because it's like a house arrest. Being in sanctuary is like being in jail, but you are not in jail. She feels safe because she has besides the movement, sanctuary movement, and the ecclesiastic people who are support her, it's a community who builds this support, and it's really important, no? I spoke with her yesterday, and she was telling me, Cynthia, I am so grateful that I have a lot of people who come today, yesterday, tomorrow, who are coming, every day and support her, bring her food, money, give her their children. seeing like a humanitarian approach of this crisis.
So, walk me through like a day for her and her kids. I mean, she's in the church all.
She's all the time in the church, in the spaces of the church, in the room, and there's a library where she is sleeping with her two children. She wake up, she make breakfast for her and David. Sometimes she took like English classes and women classes, yoga, Reiki, and sometimes she helps other women around the church to make something clean, or she participates in the church, in the activities into the church.
And so, how did she find out that she was going to be deported?
It was curious because she was even the other day that one of her closest friends told her, "No, Amanda, you have to figure it out how to find these kind of churches who help people, who are in risk or who have final order of deportation." And basically, they Google the internet, Santuario in Spanish, and then appears the phone number of Sanctuary Movement Coalition New York, and they call, and they spoke with Father Juan Carlos Ruiz, and was the way that they found, resolve their case. Juan Carlos knew Padre Luis Barrios for a long time ago, and she presented the weekend before she was 17 in the church, and then she took sanctuary.
And so, what are you photographing?
Why?
What?
I am photographing the intimacy moments. I want to have like photos that give us like emotional approach, psychological impact, the strategies that are building inside the sanctuary, inside the people like Amanda, and activities that they do during the day. For example, Dulce and Daniela go each Tuesday to musician classes. I went. Yeah, they play.
But in the church?
In the church.
In the church.
It's an after-school program in the church, and sometimes I photograph them when they are like singing or playing music or sleeping or taking breakfast or dinner, or moments that make us, give us, humanize them.
Yeah. Laura, how common is it for people to go to their check-ins and get a deportation order?
Yeah, so that's what happened in Amanda's case. She came in 2004 and was detained and held for one night and then released. And she didn't know that she had a deportation order at that time. She also didn't know that she could apply for asylum at that time. And in many ways, that points to the faults and the failures of even back in 2004 of how asylum cases were handled. That she wasn't given any information or even given the requisite questioning to ascertain whether she should be put in the process of an asylum case. So she lived for about a decade until she was, like many people, involved in a very minor traffic incident. She was a passenger in a car that got in a car crash. And when the police came, she presented her Guatemalan passport because, and this speaks also to some struggles that immigrant rights groups are waging. There are no licenses in New York State available to undocumented people. So even though she wasn't driving, that triggered what is now known as the ICE check-ins, which under the Obama administration meant once a year, once every 6 months, you go to the ICE office, you say, "I'm here," they ask you perhaps a few questions, and you go about your life. That was when there was a system that the Obama administration put into place about prioritizing who was, a supposed priority for deportation and who was not a priority for deportation. So Amanda was not a priority for deportation.
Sorry to interrupt you. How is it established who's a priority for deportation? Or has it been?
Sure. Under the Obama administration, there was what the government called an emphasis to deport people who had been involved in crimes. And I think it's really important to note that many of these were still very low-level crimes. And through much of your work, the criminal justice system, disproportionately targets people of color, undocumented people, immigrants. So even many who were subject to, priority for deportation, really had been involved in, racial profiling, and at times nothing at all, and at times extremely low-level crimes. That said, there's many people who were deemed not a priority for deportation. People like Amanda, who had been in a car accident that she was not driving. One of the things that the Trump administration did to ramp up deportations as soon as Trump took office was to get rid of any policy for who is a priority and who is not a priority. So now many people who have been going, like Amanda, to check-ins for many years as a very routine part of their lives find that they are now being given final deportation orders. I don't have, and I'm not sure that it exists, the statistics right offhand about how common this is, but it's an extremely common thing that we're hearing about across the country, and it's the reason many people are going into sanctuary. They say, if I go, and Sandra Lopez, who's in sanctuary in Colorado, said this recently in an interview with Democracy Now! She said, I knew if I was going to go to my ICE check-in, I would be put in deportation proceedings. I'd be separated from my children. I'd be forced to pay tens of thousands of dollars to try to get free, and maybe I would never even get free, and I'd be deported. But instead, she said, she took the courageous decision to go into sanctuary, because why would she subject herself to that?
I'm Rebecca Carroll, and I'm speaking with journalist Laura Gotensteiner and filmmaker and photographer Cynthia Santos Briones on their 5-part series for The Nation, Finding Sanctuary. Later on in the show, Tayari Jones with her new novel, An American Marriage, and Andrea Hoffman with her book about Patience Ibrahim, a Nigerian woman who was kidnapped by the Boko Haram. You're listening to Midday on WNYC. We'll be right back after the break.
WNYC supporters include Metropolitan Entertainment, presenting singer-songwriter and former First Lady of France, Carla Bruni, performing at Town Hall on Friday, February 16th. Tickets available at Ticketmaster.com. More info at MetropolitanPresents.com. Your Part-Time Controller, helping nonprofit organizations with all of their accounting and financial reporting needs. Your Part-Time Controller, the nonprofit accounting specialists. More at YourPartTimeController.com. Virgin Atlantic, with non-stop flights from New York to London daily. More info at VirginAtlantic.com. Virgin Atlantic, let it fly.
The war in Afghanistan is nearly 17 years old and is the longest-running war in America's history. On the next Fresh Air, New Yorker staff writer Steve Call talks about his new book, Directorate S, The CIA and America's Secret Wars in Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's a sequel to his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Ghost Wars. Join us today at 2 on 93.9 FM WNYC.
This is WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820, NPR News and the New York Conversation.
I'm Rebecca Carroll, and I'm speaking with Laura Gotensteiner and filmmaker and photographer Cynthia Santos Briones. Cynthia, once Amanda got her deportation order, how did she decide to take sanctuary?
Because they're children's, because she doesn't want to be separated of their family, of their children's, and because come back to her hometown means putting risk her family, her entire family, her and her children's.
You said earlier that she is missing her previous life.
Yeah.
Was that her major hesitation about going into sanctuary? It was sort of detaching?
Yes.
And how does she weave that into her life now in sanctuary? You know, the life that she lived prior. I mean, I assume she had to sort of leave pretty much everything, right? I mean, her home, her furniture, her art, her music, her...
Yeah, it's hard. Even though they have been doing everything for adjust into her new life in sanctuary, they miss everything. Imagine that one day to the other you have to leave your home, your school, your family, your community, your freedom.
Yeah.
It's difficult, even though they work every day to be happy into the place that they are right now, and make a life, a normal life. It is not a normal life for her.
And since you've been so carefully sort of documenting this, I mean, how does it feel for her as an undocumented person to be documented so closely?
It's hard because sometimes I say that the camera could be a gun, no? It's difficult to have a big camera and all the time, like, I want to photograph your intimacy moments, no? but she's trying to understand. For her, it's new everything, to have to speak in front of the microphone with the media, see her face in the television, but she's trying, and I am trying also to develop the relationship to her feels more comfortable with me inside of her place.
Mm-hmm. And the church is called Holyrood?
Holyrood Church.
Holyrood Church. What is the congregation like? And
I think that the congregation are doing amazing work. No, most of the congregation are like Latinos from Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and they embraced her and their childrens. They have been done as the volunteers also are doing an amazing work, support her case and support her and the children's.
And it's mostly Latino?
Mostly Latino. It's like also, for example, the volunteer that is volunteer for food, for security, for health and legal services. Some of them are like American citizens, Anglo-Americans.
Mm-hmm. Laura, you wrote about the Reverend of the church, Luis Barrios. What's been his role?
Yeah, he's really helped revitalize the church as a space for social justice. He's a longtime social justice organizer, but I also want to really echo, Cynthia in emphasis in congregation. As a church and as a neighborhood, it's been really incredible to see people come together to support Amanda, but also to see how Amanda gives all of these people around her this gift of something they can do in a purpose and a form of resistance that's very daily, that's very intimate, that's very much about personal relationships. So I think one of the things that's so touching to see is, more or less every night on the way back from often long days of work, there will be a half dozen women, all women, who come by the church and just sit with her and sit around, drink coffee and eat dinner and take care of the kids. Last night we were at the church and one of the closest neighbors, this woman Isabel, was brushing Dulce's hair and just doing the work of making life together. And that's something that we're really trying to explore in this project, the three of us. What does it mean not just to take sanctuary, what does it mean to make sanctuary? And how do we understand that as a gift that we all have? Because as you asked earlier, outside the church's walls, does that mean the entire rest of the country is not a sanctuary space?
Right. I mean, I think that's exactly what it means in some ways. And I think for Amanda and her children, and what I've been sort of trying to paint a picture of is making that sanctuary and what it reflects and what you want it to reflect and what we as a country want it to reflect. And then though, how to reconcile with what happens outside of sanctuary. So what do you hope for the evolution of taking sanctuary? What happens? How does it extend beyond the church?
I hope that we can all have to take sanctuary,
being transferred to Afghanistan. Those stories and more ahead next hour on WHYY.
The Institute of Contemporary Art supports WHYY and presents Carrie Leibowitz Museum Show, featuring bold, brightly colored, and comically self-effacing text-based works which draw on both a gay and Jewish perspective to address issues of identity, kitsch, modernist critique, and queer politics. More than 350 works spanning the breadth of Leibowitz's career from 1987 to the present day are on view through March 25th. Details at icafilla.org.
Welcome back to The Takeaway. I'm Todd Zwillich. Well, we just heard one view about felons' voting rights from Florida's former Governor Charlie Crist there, but not everyone agrees. Richard A. Harrison is a Florida attorney and executive director for Floridians for a Sensible Voting Rights Policy. They're a nonprofit that advocates for a case-by-case review for all felons and opposes the federal judge's ruling in this case.
The board consists of Governor Scott and several of the cabinet officers. They are the ultimate decision-making authority on clemency petitions. The process is described a little bit in the judge's order. There is a waiting period on the front end. So before one can even apply for clemency, there's a waiting period of either 5 or 7 years. Then a petition is filed. There's a lot of data collected, and at some point in the process, the applicant is entitled to go in front of the clemency board and try to make their case for clemency. There are some rules that govern how the board operates. Depending on your point of view, either the act of clemency is completely discretionary with the governor and the board, or if you're Judge Walker, it's completely arbitrary.
Do we know typically who gets denied and who gets granted a restoration of voting rights in front of this board? There have been criticisms here that very few people got their right to vote back, that it went from 30,000 under Governor Christ to 3,000 under Governor Scott. Do we have any data about who gets a yes and who gets a no?
I don't know that there is any data that is the kind of information that you could look at and analyze to try to figure out, you know, what gets you forgiveness and what doesn't. We certainly know the raw numbers, and you've mentioned some of them, but I don't know that there's a whole lot of substantive data that's maintained.
Well, Richard, I think a lot of people looking at this from a distance might think, well, if you commit a felony, you get caught, you plead guilty, or you're convicted, you might go to prison or have some other punishment. Once that punishment is done and you come out and all your restitution is paid, why don't you get your voting rights back right away? If the debt to society is paid, why should there be anyone deciding that you might not get it back?
Well, let's go back to the fundamental premise, which is this idea that you go to prison, you serve your time, and your debt to society is paid, and this has sort of become the lead argument, the appeal on the other side of this issue. But that's not really how life works. There are lots of situations where if you commit a crime, there are serious implications that will follow you long after you get out of prison. If you commit a sexual felony, you may serve all your time, get out of prison, and find that you're on a registry of sex offenders, which will haunt you for the rest of your life, dictate where you can live and where you can work. So this idea that there are no consequences of crime once you walk out of prison simply isn't the case.
Why should voting be one of those consequences, then?
Well, the short answer in Florida is because the Constitution says so.
So you're of the view that the federal court decision was wrong here. What would you like to see happen here?
Well, I don't want to talk too much about what might happen in the immediate short term, because the parties have until next week to submit additional briefing about what an appropriate remedy might be. Eventually what will happen is the judge will consider whatever the parties submit in this next round, and he will then issue some type of an injunction, and it will tell the state of Florida either that it must do certain things or it must not do certain things. And then I assume pretty confidently that the state will appeal that decision to the 11th Circuit.
And I want to ask you about the 11th Circuit. What do you know about the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals and their potential attitude towards this as this gets appealed up the chain? Where do you think the interpretation of this clemency board is likely to go?
Well, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals is generally regarded as somewhat conservative. They have had some experience in this area of disenfranchisement in 2007 in a case called Johnson versus Bush, the former Governor Bush. They considered other constitutional